more gathering of friends. So with that, I'm going to ask a couple favors. One, if you're on the phone, if you don't mind, if you'll make sure you mute your phone when you're not speaking, just to kind of cut down on ambient noise. Two, if you happen to have a camera available. I know y'all don't like to be seen, with a headshot of us streaming nonstop, but if you have a camera, if you could flip that on, that would be really great in helping this feel like it's more of a gathering of folks in the same room, make it a little more personal. So, with that, let's start the morning with introductions to see who we have with us, and we'll walk over some of the ground rules and expectations for the meeting, and then we'll get started. So. What if we start with our folks from DOE headquarters that are with us this morning? Can we have you guys introduce yourselves?
Good morning, everyone, or afternoon, I guess, for you East Coasters. This is Kelly Snyder, the acting DFO.
This is Todd Schroeder, EMSSAB.
Hi, it's Jocelyn Higian.
Hey, Jocelyn. Is there anyone else with us?
Yep, this is Alyssa Harris, our federal coordinator.
Hey, Alyssa. Anyone else? All right, so in order to make a virtual meeting run, it takes a handful of folks working behind the scenes that you don't necessarily get a chance to see. So with the folks from Savannah River that are helping pull this meeting off, would you mind going ahead and taking a second introducing yourselves as well?
Hey, it's Skinner from Savannah River. I'm watching the chat and hand raising, see if anybody has a question.
Can you mute me? Sorry, this is Heather from Savannah River, helping James moderate the meeting as well.
Thanks, Heather and James. And again, they are here to help with anything we need from an IT perspective. So feel free to call on them if we get caught up in the bind. All right, so let's take a second, walk around, and meet the board members we have with us. So we'll start with since they're hosting. How about the Savannah River side? Who do we have with us from there?
Hey, this is Gil. I'm the chair at Savannah Riverside. It's been really exciting. Nice to see y'all. And Greg's here with me. Greg, why don't you go ahead?
Hi, everybody. My name is Greg Murray. I am the vice chair of the Savannah River CAP, and I'm really looking forward to my first meeting and getting to know y'all.
Perfect. Thanks, guys. Portsmouth?
Hey, Eric. How you doing?
Good, Bob.
Robert Berry. We got Carlton Kay and Judy Borath with us off the.
Perfect. Good morning, Carlton. All right, so Paducah?
We got Don Barger here.
Oh, and I can see the mute's giving her fits.
I think who's working on it.
We have Don Barger and Victoria Caldwell with Paducah. Oak Ridge. Is there anybody on the call from Oak Ridge? Hey, Kelly, do you know who we were expecting for that?
The chair and vice chair is who I was aware of. Alyssa, have you heard any different?
I have not.
We'll check with them offline.
We'll check with them. All right. Nevada.
This is Frank Bonesteel.
Hey, Frank, how are you?
Good, thanks.
You win the award for Best Backdrop.
We tried. This is Dick Gardner, Vice Chair.
Hey, Mr. Gardner, how are you?
I'm fine. And I want you to know that when you say honor, that's how we know you're a citizen.
That's it. I know better, and now I'm caught up, and I can't get it right to save my life. I hang.
Appreciate it.
Okay, how about northern New Mexico?
Good morning from the land of enchantment. This is Bob Hall, Chair.
Bob, we're picking up a little bit of an echo on you there, just so you're aware. And I hate because you have a sweet radio voice. That would be fantastic coming across. We just need to, just letting you know. Is there anybody with you, Bob?
Joshua Magdalena should be on.
Okay. How about Idaho?
Right. This is Jerry Erzman, Vice Chair. And Brad's joining us soon.
Good morning, ma'am. How are you?
Great, thank you.
Awesome. All right. And the Hanford Advisory Board.
Good morning. This is Susan Leckman, Chair. I'm sorry I don't have... My aging computer can't figure out how to use the camera with this particular application, so I'll keep trying, but I am on the phone.
I wanted to see Susan. This isn't fair.
And I don't even... I got dressed for this. Staying in my pajamas.
This is
Hey, Shelley, how are you?
I'm great, and it's so good to see everyone.
Good deal. All right. So as we go through the meeting today, a couple things we want to talk about. We're going to do a little different than we normally do. We've asked our presenters to kind of go through their presentations in one solid chunk. And I don't know to what extent they can do this, but I've asked if they move through the slides at a quicker pace than we would normally go through, so that at the end of the time allotted, we'll have a larger block of time that we can handle questions from you guys, the chairs, to our presenters. We'll handle questions. We'll kind of go around the room by your sites and ask for one question per site, and kind of once we've hit all the sites, circle back around until we've either eliminated questions or we've run out of time. But that seems like the best way to keep it fair and equitable in this situation. Still give everybody a chance to voice their opinions and their questions. Hey, I guess you guys, I'm sure you've seen the emails and you know that this is being broadcast on the SRSCAB YouTube channel, so it is live broadcast. If you're not actively taking part as a participant in the meeting, that is maybe a better venue for you to follow along and to keep up with this, so that we have maybe a little less taxing strain on our system. So we can work that either way. Throughout the meeting, if you have questions or you need to jump in, feel free to use the chat function, or there's it should be in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. There's also the opportunity for you to raise your hand. There's a little hand that pops up in the list of participants. And you can raise that, and that will signal either James or I, and he and I are in contact. So we can go from there to make sure that we acknowledge your question and get a chance to handle it. Anything else, you guys, questions or anything we need to handle before we get rolling today? All right, hearing none, we're going to pass this off, and we're going to let Kelly introduce our first speaker, if that's okay, ma'am.
Absolutely sorry about that.
No, caught you off guard. That's my fault.
I was trying to hunt down Oak Ridge and we found him, so that's wonderful. Sorry about that. Yes, I want to introduce Todd Schroeder. As you all are very familiar with him, I wasn't going to go into his background since He is a routine figure for most of the folks on this call, but I do want to just thank him for his time and being able to come and participate in this meeting. I know that all of the board members look forward to hearing from him. And so, Todd, thank you so much for your time, and I'm going to pass it on to you.
Thank you, Kelly. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. I do have slides. Due to some technical difficulties, I'm going to have to call out as they go, which slide we're on, but we'll make sure that gets covered. So, it's happy to be here today. Glad to be here. If I recall, our last time we talked in this group, I think was about this time last year in Idaho. I had only recently taken the job and had a good chance to talk to everyone and get a feel for everyone. And hopefully, maybe next year's meeting we can do it back in person moving forward. So I'm going to take a few minutes today just to talk through where we are in EM, kind of how COVID actually affected us, how we kept some work going, how it affected other projects, and eventually talk about some other things like that, and then planning on a fair amount of time for questions and answers as much as possible. So with that, Jocelyn, you want to go next slide, please? Slide 2. There we go. So we have a number of new faces in new roles here at headquarters. Kelly, I think you bet, that's already spoke. She is our designated federal officer for all of these activities now. She actually, correct me if I'm wrong, Kelly, you're actually still based in Nevada, though, but certainly doing a good job for us from there. Jocelyn DeHagen, who introduced herself earlier, she, in the last year, took over as the Director of Intergovernmental Stakeholder Programs, had previously been our Chief of Staff or Deputy Chief of Staff at EM headquarters, so a broad range of knowledge of EM as a whole, and certainly can reach the right people we need to at times. Mary Cougar came over to us from Homeland Security right at about a year ago, as I recall. I think she actually went to Idaho with us, but she's doing a great job coming in to really coordinate throughout all of our regulatory intergovernmental stakeholder engagement to try to get a consistent approach to them, and frankly to increase our visibility, our transparency, and our interactions with groups as we move forward. Next slide. We also have some new senior leadership as far as the within the EM 3, 4, and 5 branches. Hey Chung, he's EM5, which is our Assistant Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for Corporate Services. Big long title. He came over. He had been doing security and safety for us, and I think everyone knows Day has a very long history with EM. I think he's had a number of positions throughout the organization. He's really concentrated in the last year on contracts and procurement, project management, those areas. In particular, and I'll talk more about it in a minute, the response to COVID and some of the contractual changes we made and things like that. So, great to have Day bring that vast experience to us, and certainly focus in an area that Ike White, our boss, has focused on, that's acquisitions. Nicole Nelson-Jean, she is EM3, Assistant Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for Field Operations. She just very recently came over to us from NNSA down at Savannah River. She was the manager of the Savannah River Field Office. I think that's the title NNSA uses for it. Down there, she has lots of experience throughout the complex. Los Alamos, she was site manager of Lawrence Livermore at one time, and has some, admittedly many years ago, some EM experience. But it's great to have Nicole come on, bringing her field manager experience with her. I always find it certainly helps in the communications, particularly for that position that's over the field, to have some field experience. So she brings that. She's been coming up to speed over the last month. In fact, I think she's out visiting some sites here next week and this week and next week. Candice Robertson, she is currently the acting Deputy Assistant Secretary for Resource Management. So this is our sort of the internal backroom parts of EM, how we operate all our computer technology, our resources we need internally, HR, human capital, things like that. Kind of the Candice's job is very important to sort of keep the machinery of EM moving. For those of you who know her, Candice, grew up in Nevada, so certainly has in fact, was a commissioner in Nye County one time, many years ago now. But long history with EM, served in many roles, Chief of Staff, Director of Comms, and within the department, she has served in the 7th floor as Deputy Chief of Staff for S2. She's been Human Capital 1 or HC1, Head of Human Capital for all departments, and other similar roles within the department. So brings a wealth of experience both in the field and the department. Robin Berger, she just recently joined us for Director of Communications, came over from the Pentagon, I believe, working DoD issues. Brings, again, a strong experience in working with stakeholders, with congressional interactions, communications, helping us with thinking about how to present things in new ways and different ways. So definitely glad to have Robin on board. And then for many of you know, the sad news here, sad for us, good for Betsy. Betsy Connell is retiring at the end of this month after a very long career with DOE, both on the contractor side and the federal side. I believe she started at Savannah River, worked for quite a long time out in Idaho. She was a senior advisor up in the Secretary's office at one time. She has been had a number of roles within EM itself. Her current role is Associate Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for Regulatory Policy Affairs. So a lot of interaction with stakeholders, a lot of interaction with state regulators throughout the complex, and will be sorely missed here in another 2 weeks as she moves forward. Next slide, please, Jocelyn. So to talk a little bit about our work and what we've been doing here for the past year or so. Our top priority is health and safety of our workforce. And so you can imagine our site, much like most of the country, back in March, April, May timeframe, we really cut back on on-site presence. We moved to 100% telework where possible. A few actions, of course, you still had to have people at site, security, safety, a few mission critical or national security missions kept moving. But back in March, April timeframe, we were essentially about 100% telework at many of our sites. Interesting enough, the one site that did not happen at was Moab. Moab basically kept their activities going. There were two reasons for that. One, it's relatively rural area, low infection rates, and their work very well lends itself to social distancing. It's uranium mill tailings remediation, so it's a lot of big trucks, operators in the trucks by themselves, moving either front loaders or dump trucks or loading the trains, that type of thing. But the rest of our sites, we moved to what we call Phase 0, which is essentially just mission essential critical operations. We also developed at that time a approach to move out of these phases, move from Phase 0, Phase 1, Phase 2, Phase 3. Phase 1 would be then bringing back high priority, low risk work, tended to be not particularly PPE heavy, work that lend itself very well to social distancing and or engineering controls, plexiglass barriers, that type of thing, and administrative controls, such as spread the work out. So all of our sites moved to Phase 1 over the last few months. In the cases where we were a small presence at the site, say Lawrence Berkeley National Lab in California, we moved when the bigger tenant, in that case, Austin Science moved. We just moved when they moved to phase one. We moved to phase one. In sites where EM is the major tenant, we decide that, like WIP or it's a good example. We're the sole tenant there. And then in cases where it's kind of split up, Oak Ridge is probably the best example, where there's a large science presence, a large EM presence, and a large NSA presence. We all work together. I have weekly calls with those offices. One of the ironic things of this, the events over the last few months, we probably work now closer than we ever have, or certainly in a long time, with Office of Science, Office of Nuclear Energy, NNSA. Communication has definitely improved tremendously. Later in the summer, we were able to start moving towards phase two for a number of sites, which meant bringing back a little bit more work for workers. And for those sites, I believe we are at phase two for all sites except Savannah River and Oak Ridge. Those two, I believe, are still phase one. Some of the keys we looked at in the process for phase changes was to move in a phase, it had to be approved by EM1, Mike White, my boss. But we would look at the data from the site. This would be incident rates within the community. Was there any community spread on the site itself? A percent positive test. The sort of thumb rules we use, and these come from CDC guidance, is we look at a normalized rate of cases, meaning how many cases per 100,000 people in the population over the last couple weeks. A generalized thumb rule is around 200 cases or less. You're doing better in the community. Above 200, it's not so good. We also look at percent positive tests, and you would like to see in a best place you want to be is less than 5% of tests within the community are positive for COVID. And the reason we do that normalization per 100,000 is, at a site like ETech, there's something like 8 million people in Ventura County. So it's a very large population, so you'd inherently imagine seeing your just absolute numbers being higher. Whereas, say, WIP down in New Mexico in Eddie Lee County, the total population might only be 75,000. So you normalize it for 100,000 to kind of get an even look across the entire complex itself. No site has moved to phase 3 yet. We're still looking to see what phase 3 is. I think at one time, I think we're not alone by any means. I think the country as a whole has come sort of moving towards this way of thinking. Phase 3 at one time was believed to be, you hit phase 3, you're back to normal, pre-COVID, everything's good. I suspect now where phase 3 will be is, certainly all the work on the site is able to be done, but we're still going to have controls, masks, social distancing, administrative engineering controls, I think, for a little while longer, even after the site moves to phase 3. But we're still figuring that out. Again, no site has moved yet to see what it is. Lessons learned, we have weekly calls with all the sites. I lead a call with all the field managers every week to just talk, hey, what have we learned here? What have you figured out to do work better or more efficiently, that type of thing. Next slide, please. So you remember, I think, or a lot of people are familiar, earlier this year we had put out a calendar year 20 priority list. What can we get done? And within that, there were 5 high-level priorities. Achieve significant construction milestones. This would be IWTU, WTP at WIP, at Hanford, the new shaft at WIP, shaft number 5, and SWPF at Savannah River. We also had, then number 2 was the execute key project milestones. And this was essentially activities at our other sites that weren't big construction milestones, but something to keep advancing the site. And I believe we actually had one on there for every site, with the exception of our work at Sandia, which is a relatively small pump and treat activity. But every other site had a key key project on there, and I'll talk more about those in a minute. We do see EM footprint. Go back one, please. Thank you, Jocelyn. We do the EM complex footprint. I often joke that EM does not stand for enduring mission. Our job is to get done and then turn the land back over to either the community for some future use or to other parts of DOE or others for different missions. And that might be NNSA or science for them to have, perhaps a new building built, a new mission, that type of thing, or in some cases, legacy management for long-term stewardship. Award contracts, again, quite a few were put out this year. Interesting enough, this area, more than any other, we might actually be more efficient now than we were before. It's sort of asking why this is. Why does it seem like contracts have actually sped up? And it's interesting, the telework environment, I don't know if people can concentrate better. I've heard sort of, somewhat humorous stories, people saying they don't commute an hour a day each way, so they actually have more time and perhaps in a better mood, not sit in traffic for an hour each way. But we've moved on a number of contracts. Saying that, we've actually also listened to industry in a few cases for some of the sort of parts and pieces of the contract, given industry 30 days to respond to a request for information or an RFI or an RFP. We've extended those because industry itself has had a little bit of trouble or had to adjust to the new brand. And so we think everyone on that. And then number 5, drive innovation, improve performance. Some of this is internal to EM, but a very important one here was the first use of the high-level waste interpretation to dispose of waste at Savannah River earlier, about a month ago. Next slide, please, Griffin. I will add, we are working on calendar year 21 priorities right now and seeing what those are. So hopefully we'll have a chance to share those sometime in the future here. So I'll go into a little detail of the site itself. Salt waste processing is really great victory here. Real credit to the teams out there, the site, the regulators, the workers, DOE, the contractors, everyone. This facility went hot. Last week, 2 weeks ago, like that. They introduced radioactive waste. So this is real key because this is the last facility we need for treating waste at Savannah River. So we have all the parts and pieces in place to finish the tank waste mission at Savannah River. Now, it'll take a number of years to get through that, obviously. But real just fundamentally shift our whole priority there at Savannah River to a mission and completion mindset, even more than it was before. Direct feed, low activity waste. It's the approach we use, where we will vitrify the cuprinate out of double shell tanks in the low activity waste facility. That construction should finish here in the very near future for low activity, and then it'll be for the low facility that we turned over for commissioning and startup over the next couple years. One more facility next year. We're still finishing the effluent management facility, and that construction should be finished next year. And similarly, all the tank farm work, putting in the tank side, cesium removal system, that work is well on its way to prep the waste to come over to the plant. So great progress there as we move forward. Integrated Waste Treatment Unit, Idaho, IWTU. This plant, more than any other, the schedule was impacted by COVID. And it was an unfortunate point where we were getting to the very end, and some of the work we were working on earlier this year was things like closing up tanks, welding in confined spaces, that type of thing. And unfortunately, that requires workers to be right up on top of each other. And so we had to figure out ways to do that in the environment we're in a social distance environment. They've done a lot of good work out there, Connie, her team, and the contractor, figure out ways. So now we are proceeding in all the work. But the schedule was impacted some for this facility. But we do anticipate this facility coming online also in the near future. That being said, all three of these, Ike White also talks about this being an inflection time for DOE, and it's true. We're moving towards, large-scale treatment of tank waste across all of our sites. when these come online here in the next couple of years. It really does change sort of the mindset, I think, of EM. Next slide, please. The ETTP, East Tennessee Technology Park, I believe last week, was it? The secretary was down there, S4, the Undersecretary Barr, and EM1 Aquifer were all down there to celebrate the completion of this work, the tearing down of the buildings. I believe that picture you see there, you would not see that now if you go out there. Those are the last of the buildings coming down. Great victory there. It allows us to, one, now repurpose that land for the community use. I think the history center's out there, and a number of activities, I think, finishing up the project here will occur in the next couple of years, but all buildings themselves are down. So really, really good work by everyone involved in that. Ellis, our manager out there, and Ken Cougar and his team on the contractor side, everyone. So it's a real credit. It'll allow us now to start looking at buildings in Y12 and the Oak Ridge National Lab, and some of the demolition activities we have there. Waste isolation pilot plan, I mentioned fish shaft. This is the construction activities associated with sinking this. We're going to sink the biggest shaft we've ever had it with out there. I think it's, say, 25-foot diameter. Goes down over 2,000 feet down. The process is you sink the shaft first, and then you mine back into WIP itself. So this picture is about probably about a quarter mile or so, maybe a little bit more, from the exhaust shaft and some of the existing facilities out there at WIP. So the shaft, they start earlier this year, and hope to see it next year. Next slide. Tech, out in California, this facility in Southern California, property. It's the site itself is actually managed by a couple different government entities. NASA owns a significant portion. DOE owns a part of it. The DOE side, we were down to 18 buildings remaining to be demolished. For various reasons, not a whole lot of work had been done for quite a long time. About a year ago, Secretary Perry engaged Governor Newsom in trying to get this project moving forward. Betsy Connell, in particular, had numerous conversations with the state of California. A real good partnership, I think, with the state and with us, to the point where we got the building demolition started earlier this year. I believe we have at least 10 buildings down now, working on the last one, probably more than that, and moving to get all of those facilities down after quite a long time of not a lot of work being done out there. And then I mentioned land turnover here in Nevada. The Tonopah Test Range is north of the DOE site proper, about 4 hours north, 3 hours north of Las Vegas. There was some remediation we were doing up there from some shots, the clean slate shot back in the, I think it was the 50s that they did those. We were finishing up our remediation this year. I think we're done, with the exception of last paperwork. And in fact, I believe there's a celebration next week or tomorrow actually, under Secretary DeBar, to celebrate us, EM, turning this land over to LM for legacy management for long-term stewardship. And so we've completed our mission up there in the Tonopah Test Range. Next slide. Building X326 at Portsmouth is our next building we're working on. Had a little bit of impact this year. We're certainly hoping to be a little bit further along here. But again, Robert and his team have figured out some better ways to do this. The first sort of big piece of operation we have to do is remove the transite panels off the outsides of the buildings, and then allow us to getting into demolition of this building here. They had to do a little bit of site prep work to build some various barriers and liquid collection systems, that type of thing. But they're back on track. Hope to see this work again again, relatively near future. Down at Paducah, moving some of the refrigerant off-site, some of the old various hazards that are on-site at Paducah. They've had a chance to do that. There was some extra funding last year. So certainly we're working as hard as we can there at Paducah to, in the short term, get, do hazard reduction and get some of the, make the site safer for our workers in preparation for demolition of the site. Next slide. So EM strategic vision. I think everyone knows we issued a document earlier this year at Waste Management in March, laying out what we think is our vision for the future. This document, there were a couple things we made very conscious choices on. It was a vision document, not a project plan, not a program plan. And so it was only, 30, 40 pages long. It's meant to be readable, it's meant to be used by stakeholders, congressional, others, to see sort of the high-level vision for the site, or for the EM mission. Just because certain projects aren't listed in there doesn't mean they're not important. It just, we had to make some choices in how we discussed it, moving forward. Each site sort of came down to they had 2 or 3 pages to talk about their site. In general, we did not list specific regulatory milestones. We often list work associated with milestones, but we didn't list milestones themselves. That's kind of a decision I made. One, I find you quickly get into jargony talk. If you do that, it'd be like remediate waste site 327-3-4 or something, and no one knows what that means. So I sort of put out a rule last year to put this together to minimize the DOE jargon, things like that. So it became more of a qualitative discussion out there. It's meant to be a living document. We're hoping to issue another one next year. In fact, we're working on it now. One of the big pieces of that, and we've heard from everyone, is a little bit more input from all the sites. Later this week, I will be sending out an email to many of the stakeholder groups soliciting some input going forward. We're trying to figure out the best way to handle that. Again, one of the things is I do not want this document to grow into a 100-page document. So it will not be, huge expansions of discussions at site. But we want to make sure we're more aligned with where stakeholders are thinking we're going and things like that. So we're hoping for some real good input and real good discussion. At the local level, the sites themselves will also be sharing the document with their local groups, such as these groups we're talking to today, various CAPs, to try to get some input. I think the specific way the input is going to come is looking at last year's document. What would you change? What would you like to see in here? That type of thing. We're not necessarily planning on writing next year's, then that out for review. But we're still working through that as we move forward. But certainly the intent is to get more community involvement. Last year, I sort of made the decision as we put it together that being the first time, we had a little bit less involvement, but the reason was I find it's never good to send a blank sheet of paper to the field or to anyone and say, hey, what do you want to do? It doesn't really focus the conversation. And getting it out the first time, I just felt it's better to get an initial version out. And now that it's out, we have a chance to have a more constructive conversation on the document itself as we move forward. Next slide, please. And again, I mentioned we certainly want to hear from everyone. Strategic vision, as you say, I'll be sending out an email here, asking for input from various groups, not only these groups, but like STIGWIG, the tribal groups, the state regulators. I will say probably often get asked, but the number one thing we need from sites or advice that we need. And I believe it's the end state vision. What do you want the site to look like at the end? It's very important because it's not how clean is clean. It decides what infrastructure we may be designing. You can imagine if it's a wildlife refuge, that's one set of sort of cleanup goals to reach. A new park or use an existing facility, that's something different. And so that second piece of education, I actually think is a very, very important piece of education with everyone. So I believe, was it the last slide? Yes, last slide.
All right.
For questions.
All right, thanks, Todd. Hey, we're going to work around the room and take questions at this point. We have about 10 minutes, maybe just a little less, but we need to stay on schedule because we have public comment coming up in roughly 40 minutes, so we want to make sure we hit that. So we're going to start with Hanford, and we'll go Idaho next. So Idaho, you will unmute and be prepared. Hanford board, you get to ask one question, and if you don't have a question, it's perfectly acceptable to say pass and hold on, and we can catch them next go around. So Susan, Shelley?
I would not have a question. My question is, because you're indicating here that you would like to have more input on these various topics that you identified, does that mean we're going to get a little more transparency so that we can provide informed input?
Yeah, I believe so. Again, as I mentioned, strategic issues, specifically asking for input from sites, certainly the site itself, Hanford, and his team to talk about the specifics of the site a little bit better. I don't know exactly how, it's going to be a tab meeting, where to roll out. But the hope is, yes, we're a little bit more transparent as far as this document. You've seen it last year, so you know the format. So we're hoping that helps to focus it down a little bit better going into the future.
All right. Thanks, sir. Thanks, Susan. All right, Terry, Brad, you guys are up. Northern New Mexico, you're next if you'd like to unmute. Terry, Brad, a question from either of you? All right, I'm not hearing anything. New Mexico, question from you? Yes.
Bob. I think the only question I'm sorry about the echo. The only question is, how does COVID and the government spending affect the phase 3?
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out what phase 3 exactly looks like. And so I say we're going to have to see exactly what phase sites move into phase 3, that type thing. But it's something we're certainly aware of moving forward. I don't have a real good answer yet on this. I think a lot of people are still trying to figure that out completely.
All right. What about Frank, Dick, with a question from you guys? And then Oak Ridge will be next.
The Nevada chair has no questions at this time. Thank you.
All right. Oak Ridge, were you able to jump in and join us?
I was. Thank you. Hey there. I don't have questions. Shelley asked the question that I had planned to ask, so I'm good.
All right, Paducah followed by Portsmouth. Any question, Don?
Eric, I have no questions.
All right, Portsmouth?
No, sir. No questions at this time. Can we reserve the right to recall the witness, though?
I will be here for a while.
All right. We'll go Savannah River, then back over to Susan and Shelley with the HAB. Gil, questions?
I don't have any questions. Greg, how about you?
Sure, I'll ask a question real quick. What's the overall DOE estimate of how much COVID has sort of degraded progress? Is it 10% down? Is it 30% down? What's the estimate at this point? Thank you.
Yeah, I can't speak for DOE as a whole. For EM, it's interesting in that it really does depend on the work itself. As I mentioned, Moab, little to none out there because again, you're moving dirt, your big machines are separated. Certainly, it has impacted schedules where sites had to get the work right on top of each other. The most impacted work is heavy PPE usage with rad techs at a control point where people are coming in and out. They just have to get close together. Those have been the areas that have been impacted the most. You can imagine like tank farm operations at Hanford or Savannah River, that type thing, or any place you just have to wear a lot of PPE seems to be our biggest. I don't have a real number because it just varies from site to site. Some sites I would say were, obviously at one point we were 100% affected, right? Because we literally had no one out working. Like WTP was a great example. There was a time when we did, early on when we were in phase 0, we weren't doing anything. Now we've gotten, I believe, all, if not all of the workforce back. They've split it up into shifts. They're working day, night shifts. So, now at this point, relatively small. I don't have an overall, number because it just varies so much from site to site. I would not be surprised if at some point in the future, Congress or someone else sort of asks for a number. What is the total cost of COVID, that type of thing. And we'll have to see then. The hardest part is, of course, until we're completely out of it, it's tough to say what the whole impact is. But I'll say qualitatively, the more you can work outside, the more you can spread out, the least impact. Or the more you can, work from home and telework and that type of thing. I mentioned acquisitions. I would say it's almost 0% there. Work that's heavy PPE, requires people real close together, welding, fire watches, that type of thing, have the most impact, have had the most impact.
Thanks. Nice question, Greg. We have time for maybe one last question, Susan, Shelley.
No, I'm good. Shelley? Guess not.
All right. Todd, anything to close us up? Last comments from you before we move on?
Yeah. I'll just add one final, I've just talked about one final point I'll make. Even the work I mentioned that has been more easily, we figured out how to do it, construction work, WTP. I think there's still going to be impacts, obviously. We're never going to be as efficient as we were until we're completely out of the engineered and administrative controls that we have in place. But I do think we have very, people who are trying to figure out ways to do it. But there'll certainly be impacts. I don't have a crystal ball when things like vaccines will be ready and all that other stuff. But I think there'll be at least some impacts here for a little while longer. So, but no, like I say, I think I'm going to be here for the next couple sessions. So certainly, if there's more questions, we can talk over the next hour or two.
This is Simone at Hanford. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good. I was having trouble with my getting unmuted and getting in the queue. Gosh, Todd, I'm really We came to a grinding halt, of course, here at Hanford in mid-March, and are just now starting up again. But even with doing third shifts, that's not going to make up or bring us up to our 100% that we had, mid-March.
Right. No, you're right. It's one, it is going to be very site-specific, I think, but we're in the process of looking at that now. There's no doubt, in the sort of regulatory space, we're going to have to talk to regulators about milestones and impact. At Hanford, I believe we did send some communication to the state about invoking force majeure and its potential impacts on milestones. We also, our contractors, obviously, we're going to have to adjust some contracts or look at requests for equitable adjustments. I'll say, we sort of started that process now. I don't have a good answer on when it's going to end because it, frankly, like I said, kind of depends on when I get to phase 3. Work gets back to fully normal, I guess I call it. It's kind of one of those things. It's not a particularly satisfying answer is, but we'll be at the end. We'll know we're at the end when we're at the end. Predicting when we're going to get there is still a little bit difficult. So determining the overall impact and the path forward is something we're still working on.
Thank you.
All right. Hey, thanks, Todd. I appreciate you taking time with us this morning. We're gonna slide forward on the agenda to the round robin slides. We're gonna do the first half of the round robin. We're gonna see where we can get to on that. Each board has submitted some thoughts and comments. Kelly set up a new system for us to answer 2 of 4 questions, and then each board will have 5 minutes to kind of relay their thoughts and ideas to the rest of the group, and then if there's any follow-up question, we can address that accordingly. But we're going to go start and hand it off to you and let you kind of walk through this. So the first board is Idaho. Savannah River, you're on deck. But Terry, the floor is all yours, ma'am.
Be able to join us. Brad, click twice.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you, Brad.
Good deal. I apologize. My audio cut out there for a second. So, are we going through our slides at this point, or?
Yes, sir. Yeah, Brad, go ahead and go through your slide for us if you have.
Well, I apologize. I can't see the slide. I can see everything else. So, maybe Terry, you can kind of start off, and I'll chime in because I'm not able to see the slide up on the same screen here.
Okay, so I will go. We have 2 hot topics in Idaho. First one is the protection of the Snake River Plain Aquifer by monitoring and tracking cleanup progress and milestones related to compliance of the Idaho Settlement Agreement and other cleanup-related regulatory and legal agreements. This is a big concern in Idaho. We, as the board members, really think that this is important. Oh, I see the slides are showing up. We have asked the Idaho people if they will devote one of our 4 meetings a year primarily to the Snake River Plain Aquifer. So, Brad, can you see the slide now? Do you want to step in?
Yes, I can. Absolutely. So, I think Terry kind of spoke to at least some of it, but the conversation that I think we had, at least to some degree, back in Sun Valley a year ago is one of our greater picture goals as well, just in terms of urging a complex-wide plan and process to move forward and kind of establish certainty on identifying funding and opening some type of a long-term, high-level waste spent nuclear fuel repository. And one of those things that may be out of our purview, but again, we want to put that down as something that's definitely of interest to us. And then last, we're going through a possible transition, I guess, in contractor. So, especially with everything that's happening at IWTU, it's crucial for us to kind of maintain a smooth transition if that takes place and not lose the progress we've been making, especially in processing that sodium-bearing waste. So, I think that kind of covers, unless you can think of anything else to add, Terry.
We did overseeing the safe startup of the steam reforming technology at the integrated waste treatment unit is also, one of our very hot topics here. So those 4 things.
Hey, that's Eric. This is perfect. I appreciate it. Brad, glad you were able to join in. We were able to get the slide up in front of you. Are there any questions, follow-up for Idaho? All right. I did not see any hands go up, so we will thank you guys. I appreciate your thoughts, and we will slide forward to Savannah River.
How you doing, Eric?
Yeah.
We good?
Yep. Go ahead, sir.
All right. Hey, Savannah River, we've had some exciting things happen during COVID. That's kind of how I'm calling the last 6 months. But DOE has authorized our salt waste processing facility, SWPF, for hot radioactive operation. This has been coming for years. It's finally come out. We're commissioned. We're ready to go. SWPF will allow Savannah River site to process the majority of our salt waste, approximately 90% of that salt waste. SWPF will separate our salt waste it'll separate out cesium, strontium, I always say this word wrong, actinides or actinides, and waste slurry. After the separation, the concentrated high activity waste will go to DWPF, which I believe many of you that were on our tour last year got to see DWPF, to be vitrified, be put in glass. The decontaminated waste will be mixed with grout, and the decontaminated salt waste will be sent to SDU number 6. Now, those of you that were out at Savannah River site last year saw these SDU number 6. It was that huge round structure you saw. That structure holds 32 million gallons of waste, liquid waste. It's 42 feet high and it's 375 feet in diameter. It is ginormous. To give you an idea, down here, I know it's kind of a broken record. University of Georgia and SEC football and South Carolina football are big deals, but you can fit Sanford Stadium, where the University of Georgia Bulldogs play football, inside SDU number 6 and all the SDUs. SDU number 7 is continuing to be constructed. SDU number 8 has been started and is still in very early stages of that build. I think they only have rebar out so far. Why are we building these things so quickly? Because once SWPF gets to max operational level, that 32 million gallon structure I just talked about will be filled in 18 months. In a year and a half, it'll fill 32 million gallons. It's a huge deal. We're excited about it. Our tank farm is finally getting what was spoken about earlier in the update. Our tank farm's finally getting the processing facility it needs, and we're awfully excited about it. So that's taken up a lot of our time here at Savannah River. Currently, we are awaiting literally any day now the announcement of the Savannah River National Lab contract. The current contractor is Savannah River Nuclear Solutions. The CAB, both Savannah River Site and the EMSSAB board that we're all on right now, is benefited strongly from SRNS, with their desire and their ability to educate us. So as we hear this announcement come out, we're hopeful for a smooth, if not seamless, transition into that new contract. So that's the news from Savannah River Site.
Are there any questions for Gil? Hey, I'm proud of not working in a Florida State football reference on that.
We suck. So we beat the number 5 team in the country who was.
You looked good this week.
We won. Hey, thank
Perfect.
you. I'll give you $5 next time I see you.
Oh, you're a good man. All right, we're going to go to Portsmouth and then back to Paducah. So, Bob Berry, you are on the clock, sir.
sir. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay. All right. Our board hot topics are the following. Continuing the education series concerning environmental monitoring, including continued discussion on how to provide timely, contextual information to the surrounding communities and interested stakeholders. The SSAB spent several months studying the Department of Energy's environmental monitoring process and objectives, including data reporting. The board was working toward recommendations on data delivery and educating the community on environmental reporting. COVID-19 quarantining and safety concerns has paused this process. The second one, ongoing discussions with the Department of Energy on potential infrastructure that can be transferred as a viable asset for economic development. Economic development at the site is a major issue for our community. Discussions with DOE concerning potential infrastructure transfers such as water, electric, sewer, rail, etc., helps enhance the site for reindustrialization. The two top goals for this 21, increase our board membership to align with the community. Currently, our board membership is at 9 members, and the Department of Energy is looking to partner with the SSAB in identifying new members that will help the board reflect the 4-county region. We're still able to do the work of the board. A large membership helps the board to better serve the communities and to do provide more input on the future of the plant's infrastructure. As DOE prepares to move toward the end state for our site, understanding and defined picture needs for the future use helps DOE and community both achieve these desired outcomes. The SSAB recommendations based on the needs of SODI, JEDSO, which are regional economic development organizations, allows the DOE to coordinate cleanup efforts with the regional desires. SODI is the Southern Ohio Diversification Initiative, and JEDSO is Joint Economic Development Initiative of Southern Ohio. And those are our slides, sir.
Perfect. Thanks, Bob. Anyone have any follow-up questions for Bob? All right, hearing none. Perfect. I appreciate it. All right. Hey, and Bob, how did you not mention football? It actually starts in Ohio this week, right? So,
yes, it starts this Saturday for Ohio State against Nebraska at noon. Understand we're currently ranked number 5, even though we haven't played a game. So we'll just see how this crazy season goes and see how it all falls out.
Thanks, Bob. All right, we're going to slide over to Don Barger with the Paducah cab, and then we have the Hanford board on deck. So, Don, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Rick. Thank you. DOE has worked hard to decrease their physical footprint, cleanup liabilities, and hotel costs. Pursuing accelerated groundwater remediation, right-sizing the electrical system, updating fire suppression, phone and alarm systems, and continuing the process of the first property transfer to allow DOE to free up dollars for future cleanup efforts. As an example, you can see that when we were fully operational, we were powering up to 3,000 megawatts of electricity. Now we're consuming 10 megawatts. So we are getting ready to come off the national grid. We've got a substation coming in, and so we're downsizing the electric. We are currently heating buildings just to keep the fire suppression systems from freezing in the winter. Like most of you, we've got buildings that are incredible in size. Our C333 processing building, 24.5 acres under roof that we're working to get that fire suppression system changed over. And CAB itself has identified the contaminated groundwater plumes at Paducah as the top environmental priority at the site. pump and treat systems, and initial ERH technologies, electrical resistance heating, have shown substantial progress in shrinking the flume's off-site footprint. The CAB has asked DOE to create a multimedia approach to help show the early successes as well as plans for future remediation. DOE has prepared storyboards, and as soon as we can gather in person, we'll pick up this project and help DOE tell the story of their cleanup success. Like many of you, we are facing issues under COVID regulations. Our current governor's orders limit group gatherings to fewer than 10 people. The regional internet infrastructure limits high-speed internet capabilities needed for seamless virtual meetings. But what we're doing as we meet phone conference-wise, DOE plans to reassess the meeting possibilities and options in early December. Previous round-robin presentations over the years have stated that the largest challenge facing Paducah is regulatory delays and disputes. Recent changes to the EPA at the field and management level, as well as new upper management with Commonwealth of Kentucky regulators, provide an opportunity for new relationships and improved negotiation processes. The CAB will continue to emphasize the need to stay on schedule and keep momentum for cleanup. And as chair of the Paducah Citizens Advisory Board, I'm proud to state our board has a can-do attitude, which will allow us to face any new challenge with creative solutions. Thank you, Eric.
Thanks, Don. I appreciate that. Any questions for Don or any comments? Terry, Brad from Idaho, I'm hoping you can, I don't know if you can make it out, but Don is wearing the name tag that Jordan provided at the last chairs meeting. So make sure she knows her work and efforts still live on.
We will. Jordan is.
Maybe he's going to wear a different one tomorrow since she changed them out day to day. So we can only hope. Thank you, Don. I appreciate that. All right. So we have the Hanford Advisory Board up, followed by Shell at Oak Ridge. So Susan, the floor is yours, ma'am.
All right. Hi, this is Susan. Thank you. And Shelley and I are going to tag team this. We try to keep our presentation brief, and then we'll add a little bit to it. Board accomplishments in this incredibly difficult year because of having to transfer all of our meetings to virtual, and you all know the problems with that. The board managed to pass 5 pieces of advice, and although that doesn't seem like a large number, when you consider this is consensus advice, that means all of the 32 seats around our board agree with what has come about with this advice, and it's well thought of and incredibly informed. The advice, we of course always every year provide advice on budget priorities as much as we can with so much information embargoed. It was very difficult this year. Bee plant cleanup. We also provide advice on virtual public meetings and perhaps how they could be a little more friendly, and managing the risk of aging infrastructures. We had our yearly work plan meeting with what we call the executive committee, and that's the chairs and vice chairs of the subcommittees. And we approved the meeting schedule and the work plan for 2021 in incredibly challenging times. And I'm not going to say new normal because there is nothing normal about it in these abnormal times. And Shelley's going to address the cross-cutting issues and the HAB's top goals. Shelley?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Oh, good. For some reason, the mute button and I don't get along very well. So I didn't hear anybody talk about budget woes or concerns with the continuing resolution, and that's something that we're looking at and wondering about as a cross-cutting topic for all of our boards. For us, the focus is, of course, is the tank waste remediation and getting the direct feed low activity waste up and running and addressing disposition challenges for our site. But budgets is intrinsically woven into that, And what we don't know right now, we're sure hoping will be revealed, by the end of the calendar year, in terms of how we're doing and where we're going, and to try to maintain a positive pace. We're having a little bit of trouble with securing supply chains in these COVID times. And at first, although I think it's eased up now, there were problems with securing the necessary PPE to tackle rad remediation. So you can't start a project when you can't see it through to the finish, and that's a real issue. And so we've got to make sure that those supply chains are open and working well. I've also recently heard that there are problems with securing the grades of steel necessary for our vendors to build the components for our systems. And so that's something that I don't know if others of you are having that problem. It might be something we could talk about as a programmatic issue. If it is, maybe it isn't, but there are some issues with that, with steel at our site. The other thing, of course, is then maintaining the progress, cleanup progress, in these COVID times in the pandemic, and where it demands smaller crews within work boundaries. And we already know at our site that bringing on third shifts isn't going to alleviate the backlog of work. And then, of course, what does that mean for our schedules and our legally binding milestones? And so we're very concerned about that. In terms of our top goals for fiscal year 2021, the board really wants to return to in-person meetings, as we all, I think we all do across the programmatic site. There's a longing to be meeting in person, and we're finding that it's a real struggle, with the virtual board to meet the needs and the expectations of the Hanford Advisory Board members and the public. And I think we're going to have to see some shifts and try some new strategies in how we reach our goals for finding consensus. We are a consensus board, and so losing that ability to speak face to face with each other really challenges the ability to easily build community and inclusiveness and avoid misconstruing intent. We've got a lot of new board members that have just come on and joined us. And, one of the questions that the Executive Issues Committee is looking at is how do we engage them and continue to maintain a real collective, cohesive, policy-driven board. Our goal, the second goal here, is to develop informed, relevant, and timely advice and recommendations to the TPA agencies. And that has always been a goal, first and foremost, for the board. I think that we need to think creatively about how we structure more of our virtual meetings. One idea that I've thought about is possibly doing more round robins throughout our meetings, so that we start to engage the newer members and bring them in one by one to the collective whole. So, Suze, you want to talk about more challenges? I think that's it for me.
All right, thank you. Along with everybody else, Shelley pretty much covered the challenges that all of these boards are having, and that is the connection that the public can make and that board members can make, not only with each other, to build relationships so that we can understand the whys behind various actions, as well as hopefully we will get to a point where the site is back up running and moving forward in the face of the COVID protocols, which are necessary, and we're certainly not disagreeing with the need for worker and public safety when it comes to this. But we also have struggled a bit with getting the level of information necessary for the board to provide informed advice and understanding, as well as the length of time it kind of took for our new folks to get appointed to the board. It's just happened recently. We were just able to get our new members on board many months late, understanding that folks at headquarters aren't working in their offices, and it's just one more impact of what the pandemic has had on our site. The challenges moving forward, we will have a selection of chair, vice chair, and national liaison coming up at our December meeting, and getting those folks kind of passing the baton of information. This is my last EMSSAB meeting as chair, and trying to pass along the information that hopefully will be helpful and keep the board going. We celebrated our 26th year of existence, and the board members are still as committed as ever. And we really want successful cleanup. But we also want to be able to provide input that meets the needs and get the public back engaged. And in-person meetings is absolutely the way to do that. So that's it from us.
Thank you.
Thanks, Susan. Shelley, does anyone have any questions for Hanford? Susan, I think you broke up when your audio it sounded like you said this was your last meeting, but I'm going to pretend I didn't hear that.
Yeah, it is. I have meeting all these incredibly wonderful people, and I'm sorry to be saying goodbye to that, but it's been a great ride, and I wish everybody success.
I appreciate that. So we are, Shell, is it okay if we hold and we start with you after the break? We're going to public comment. We have about 2 minutes before that. Do you want to maybe take this time to talk a little bit about how public comment works on a virtual meeting, and how to provide comment if anybody's watching on YouTube at home and would like to be involved?
Absolutely. Because we are in a virtual setting, we are not able to do public comment like we normally do. And so when we advertised this meeting, as well as putting the information in the Federal Register, we asked for people to submit their public comment prior to the meeting, with the intent that any public comment that we received would be read into the record. We did not receive any public comment, so I don't have anything to read into the record. But if people are still interested in providing public comment, there is still time. We'll be accepting public comment for 1 week after the meeting is completed, and that public comment will then be distributed to all of the chairs participating in the meeting, as well as being added to the meeting minutes that will be developed. If you are interested in providing that public comment, you will need to submit that to Alyssa Harris, and maybe what we can do is post her email address on the screen later during right now when we have the public comment at break time, so that if somebody does want to provide public comment and they're watching on the YouTube feed, they'll know where to send that. I can verbally tell you what her email address is, but then we'll also try and have it in writing, so if somebody's not ready to take it down, they can take it down while we're on break. Her email address is alyssa.harris, HARRIS, at em.doe.gov.
That was absolutely perfect. Thank you, Kelly. So with that, we are at 1:20, which would be the time we would normally read into public comment, but we don't have any. So what if we take this and we go ahead and start our break just a hair early, and we will reconvene at 20 till at 40 after the hour, depending on which time zone you're in. It'll be 1:40 Eastern, 2:40 Central, and so on. So 12:40, sorry, math, not my strong suit. So what if we do that, and we'll gather back in 20 minutes, and we will continue with the meeting, and we'll go Shelley with Oak Ridge, northern New Mexico, and the good folks from Nevada to close us up. So, all right, guys, let's take a break, and we'll see you in momentarily. Thanks. after, which is when we said we would gather back. So give everybody just a second to reconnect. So our plan for the rest of the afternoon, we will complete chairs round robin. We have 3 boards left to share with us. And we should have a little over after that. So we can either, Kelly, I'll let you start to make that call. We can either have a little discussion about the round robin as a group, or we can just plow ahead to the budget update and maybe set aside a little more time for Steve Trishman, who, quite frankly, who can get enough Steve Trishman? So that might be.
I cannot. I want more Steve.
See, that's it. Who doesn't love Steve Trishman? The people have spoken. So, with that, what if we start? Shell, I thought you were there. You ready, ma'am?
I sure am. Thanks, Eric.
Oh, I love that Tennessee accent. It's all yours, man.
All right, thank you. So at the Oak Ridge site, our hot topics for this meeting are really the site closure and the transfer of the East Tennessee Technology Park, and then the groundwater feasibility study and the remedy selection for that property. The site closure is huge. It's been a decades-long effort, and really that's been about transforming the Manhattan Area Gaseous Diffusion Plant. And many of the board's 200-plus recommendations have really been about addressing this cleanup at this site, but not only the cleanup, also the historic preservation of the site. Hundreds of buildings, 13 million square feet demolished, and the disposal of over 1.7 million cubic yards of waste. And now DOE has transferred 1,300 acres back to the community, including the setting aside of some land for historic preservation, conservation, and also recreational use to the delight of the community. And members of the boards have engaged in 4 different virtual events to really commemorate this, recognizing the accomplishment, and the replays of those are available if anyone is interested. Related to the groundwater feasibility study, late November, OREM released its completed feasibility study for this site, and then we'll begin soon to select the preferred remediation option. And this is really the board's first opportunity to weigh in on the final options to address the contamination within the primary plant area known as Zone 2 at this property. Because it includes most of the major facilities associated with the uranium enrichment and related activities to the Manhattan Project, this is where most of the groundwater contamination is located. There will be a separate document that will cover other areas of this site referred to as Zone 1, but primarily focused on Zone 2 at this point, and really excited to get this work underway. As it relates to the cross-cutting topics, CERCLA 5-year review. Over the last 6 weeks, members of our executive committee have joined other stakeholders to participate in some virtual site visits, virtual being the only option due to the current situation, as part of the 2021 5-year CERCLA review process. And really what this is a comprehensive workup of the cleanup actions. I'm sure you guys have taken part in some of these as well at your own sites. But really this is the cleanup actions reviewed, taken to date, and then the associated data that's been generated as a result of monitoring during the previous 5-year period. These reviews really determine whether the remedies undertaken to date protect human health, environment, evaluating the implementation and the performance of those remedies to address any needed changes as we move forward. They were really great meetings. We've already received the revisions to the draft documents, and we're working through those now, providing any additional feedback. And then lastly, the cleanup focus is going to be shifting to ORNL and Y12. Todd mentioned some of this work briefly. OREM recently received the okay to conduct some work inside 5 specific buildings at ORNL and at Y12, enabling that workforce that was trained from the ETTP efforts to move over to those 2 sites to begin that characterization and deactivation activity. And this is a huge win. Most of you will remember that we had some pretty robust conversation about making sure that we could retain trained workforces when we were in Sun Valley. So, looking at a desire to eliminate those concerns, and I know you all have those concerns as well. We really saw this as a big win for us at Oak Ridge. Some challenges ahead, obviously, much like you guys. These sites together have more than 200 excess contaminated facilities that are no longer serving a science or an ATSEC mission, including the highest number of high-risk facilities in the complex. So the board is anticipating different challenges at these sites, things we haven't seen before, and we expect to be called on to provide input and recommendations in the years ahead. That's what I've got.
That was outstanding. Outstanding. Any questions for Shell? All right. Thank you, ma'am. I appreciate your time. All right. We're going to slide to northern New Mexico and then finish with the good folks from the Nevada Site-Specific Advisory Board. So, northern New Mexico. Bob, that's you, sir.
Okay. Let me switch over to a different microphone.
That sounds better. Are you there, Bob? Oh, no.
Can you hear me?
Yep, now you're good. Now you're good.
Okay. All right, sorry. Yeah, I thought a different microphone would be better, but so as far as our cross-cutting topics, the first one has to do with the EM funding. DOE got $130 million for scientific and technical advances for COVID-19, which is awesome. Of course, they've been spending trillions on stimulus, which is also great. But and we're all, as I think Susan mentioned, we're on a continuing resolution, which also sounds great. However, we're still in phase 2, and our problem is that, like in New Mexico, we can only have groups of 5, even though Paducah said 10. So we're very limited in what we can accomplish. So we're certainly wondering what in following years, how much we'll actually be able to accomplish, because the money may not be available at that time. With regard to our second topic, about empowering committees, we've had a lot of problems in trying to actually have meetings, and we had to cancel 3 regular CAB meetings, but our committees have been functioning almost all along, and they're the ones that actually have been able to institute, develop the recommendations, which came to the full board. So we've been able to do, I think 3 recommendations that we've passed on, and so we have made some complex, but it's very limited. As far as our top 2 FY 2021 goals, our biggest issue is the consent order. So we have a consent order between DOE, M, and the state of New Mexico. And in that, we establish milestones for the current fiscal year, and then targets for the following 2, which are supposed to become milestones. And those are cleanup objectives. And the problem right now is that DOE has proposed these recommendations, but the state apparently doesn't concur with it. This is the first year we've actually been able to see the recommendations, and we're focusing right now on trying to get our input into what those should be. So that's our challenge at the moment. As far as public outreach, our issue there is we had started up a program this last year to go out and meet with a lot of different groups and try to get public input. We have CAB members that go out that it's like 100 miles to actually come to a meeting. So we're scattered quite out, and the places we go to are scattered. So we have a problem in those communities. So what we're going to try to do is piggyback on what both the contractor at the site and DOE-EM is doing in order to do things right now in the virtual situation we're in. That's all I have, Eric.
Thanks, Bob. Glad we were able to get your mic fixed. Sounded great, by the way. Any questions for the folks at Northern New Mexico? Hey, Bob, make sure you tell my niece I said hello, okay?
Will do.
I miss seeing her. All right. All right, last but not least, Frank Bonesteel. How are you, sir?
Good, Eric. Appreciate the opportunity to present at the famous round robin. Concerning our first item, the NSSAB has viewed the activities of other boards concerning the establishment of historical sites, museums, etc., with interest. There have been discussions in the past, but with the end of cleanup activities fast approaching, a discussion regarding a museum for EM activities at the site must take place, especially one including a link between the earlier testing and the following cleanup. We know there is a great deal of material regarding the testing activities within films, stories, and other museums. There is also, we believe, considerable material pertaining to cleanup activities. But the two processes are not available in some format that acknowledges the work that has gone on over the past years with regard to the various sites that easily link the two activities. The activities at the site, the projects, the buildings, and the infrastructure all need to be remembered in some permanent way. So to reinforce, many of the cleanup sites across the nation have been able to provide representation of historical preservation material, maps, photos, oral histories, etc., that is available to the public at the actual location of the cleanup work. However, due to the ongoing national security work at N2S2, it is not possible to do this. The Atomic Testing Museum in Las Vegas is the current alternative for N2S2, but that is over 60 miles distant. In a recent EM update, Volume 12, Issue 29, October 6, 2020, from DOE, there was an article entitled Landmark Signs Show Progress at the Hanford Site. As a discussion item, we ask, what other efforts are being done by EMSSABs to address historical preservation and thus make the information available to the public? Concerning our cross-cutting topic, the Area 5 Radioactive Waste Management Complex in Nevada and the Waste Isolation Pilot Plant in New Mexico are unique as both facilities accept and dispose waste from other DOE sites. A primary concern within the EM site-specific advisory boards is safety and adequate infrastructure support DOE, EM, and by de facto, other DOE operations. For example, there is an environmental impact statement pending that will require an estimated 7.7 million metric tons of rad waste in 175,000 truckloads to travel from Portsmouth, Paducah to the N2S2 Area 5 site. That is estimated to be over 350,000 trips. There are converters from Paducah that have started to come to N2S2. This special shipping campaign is about 300 truckloads at approximately 600 trips, which is in addition to the rest of the complex's normal shipments. An additional EIS may require thousands of truckloads from Santa Susana Field Laboratory in California to the N2S2 Area 5, and specific determination of quantity has not been determined yet. What are the other sites' forecasts, along with what is planned to go to private sites? An expansion of Area 5 is ongoing. Is it enough? Is there room for further expansion if needed? In addition, there is a tremendous backlog of waste destined for WIP. as they are not really up to full capacity. Details of red waste are vague. What are the COVID impacts long term? We as a board are concerned about the hazardous materials from cradle to grave. And with that, I yield my remaining time to, I guess, no one. Thank you, Eric.
Thanks, Frank. I appreciate that. So that covers all of our boards. Todd, Kelly, anything you guys would like to add at this point before we put a bow on this this part of the meeting?
I've got a question for Frank.
Absolutely, please.
Okay. This is Susan Lechman. Frank, I'm curious, in your presentation, you didn't say anything about the potential for high-level waste being disposed at WIP. Do you have any view on that from your cab?
Our board has many views concerning high-level waste. We are, after all, the location of the famous or infamous Yucca Mountain. But as high level is, for the most part, outside the purview of our board, we left it off the list. But thank you for asking.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Frank.
All right. Todd, Kelly, just anything you want to add to close this up for us?
I'll start. No, I appreciate the issues being brought forward from each of the cab members. I mean, any last questions for me too while I'm here? I apologize, I will not be here once Steve starts. I have some other things I got to do, but so I will offer up also. I can answer any last questions that might be out there. Kelly, I don't know if you have thoughts.
No, I appreciate everybody's input on those round robins. I know that we did it a little bit different this year to help kind of structure, hopefully, some dialogue amongst the chairs and cross-cutting issues and things that y'all want to focus on. So if you want, we can, if anybody has further questions for Todd, we can do that. And then slip right into Steve's presentation and then have conversation after his presentation on the budget until our end time, if that works for everybody.
Hey, that sounds perfect, Kelly. Thanks. This is Eric, by the way. All right, so one last call. Any final questions for Todd? If so, feel free to jump right in. All right, I didn't see or hear anyone, Todd. So, hey, thank you for being here with us and taking time and sharing your thoughts and viewpoints. And we appreciate the leadership you and the folks at headquarters bring, and the message you bring to us as board members. That's important.
Absolutely, appreciate the time. Thank you.
All right, we're going to, in that case, slide forward. Let Todd sneak away and let Steve Trishman step in. We can have Kelly introduce Steve, but I think you guys all know him, love him, and we're excited to have extra Steve Trishman today. So, Kelly, do we need to introduce Steve? Would you like to, or are we good to just hand off straight to him?
I'm sorry, Eric. I think you were talking to me, but your audio cut out and I didn't hear you. So as I think what Eric was saying is that y'all know Steve Trishman, but for those that do not, just a quick reminder, he is the Director for Budget and Planning for the Office of Environmental Management. He has served in this role since January 2017. And as you all know, he is a common figure with our advisory boards. He often gives updates on what is happening in the budget world. And I just wanted to thank Steve for his time and hand it over to you, Steve.
Well, thank you very much. I hope you can hear me okay. Great. So is someone going to be putting my slides up, or do I need to do that? I think we said I would share my slides, right?
Okay.
Yes, please, if you can share your slide.
I will do that. All right, and just want to make it full screen. That's it there. Okay. All right. So I know we've done similar versions of this presentation for the last several years. I was able to try to focus a little bit more on the prioritization process and how you all can, or how your input is considered in that process. So there's a couple different ways to look at it. This one I decided to show kind of how we develop the budget, from the start to finish, and then we'll go into a little bit more of the calendar phase of it. So the main thing that we start with for each site is a federal baseline, and this encompasses all the cleanup work through the end of the cleanup, which means we've had to make some assumptions about the end state, and how materials are going to be dispositioned and things like that. And all of that allows us to kind of lay out over the life cycle what we think the cost of that cleanup program is going to be, and we use that information to do different life cycle cost analysis. That also gets reported out in the department's annual financial statement as part of the environmental liability. So the input there that you would be helping with would be, for instance, what is the end state for that site, or what is the waste disposition path for the materials that are on the site or might be leaving the site, as well as the priorities for which work scopes we do first. But all of that kind of lays out a base plan that we would like to do for the whole life cycle of the cleanup. One thing you should know is the nearer term work is a little bit better planned. The work way out in the future, there's far less detail and less certainty about that work scope. The further out, the less details there are. But those are basically assumptions, at least so that we have a program of record, or something that we can refer to as the current approach that we're taking. And as we get ready to execute that work, it moves into that second block, which is the contractor segment, or the performance baseline that's within the contract period. And that may have multiple contractors working on that at a given site. Could just be one contractor. Depends on the size of the site, the complexity of the program. And then those baselines are updated frequently, probably annually, maybe even more so, depending on how the work's being executed, as well as what the actual funding is. But these are basically the execution, say, 5-year window, typically, that we're working on. When you look at the next phase, the planning phase, so within, as we're getting ready to formulate the budget, we look at all of the work that's currently planned over the next, several years within the budget window, and we look at what options do we have for executing that work, or can some of that work be accelerated, or can some of that work be deferred, and we sort of compare across the sites where we are trying to emphasize certain priorities. Again, that's another sort of overall way that you can influence the priorities. And Todd talked about this and sort of the overall vision that EM puts out every year, looking at the next 10 years. What are the main things that we're trying to accomplish? So he mentioned, like, getting Savannah River's salt waste processing facility started and operating liquid waste there at the maximum possible rate in order to get the liquid waste program done at Savannah River in 10 to 15 years. So that would be like an example of one of the things, of that they would be on that list of priorities or accomplishments that we would be emphasizing. And there's other ones as well. But that was one of the ones that always to me jumps out. And then we use this as we go into the next phase of budget formulation. So this starts usually in the late winter, early spring, but we start putting together our sites, put together their list of priorities for this budget cycle, for the particular budget year, and they've of course gotten input from the stakeholders on which things are the priorities, and that comes to headquarters as far as putting together a overall budget request that's prioritized across the entire complex. So we have planning workshops and things with the field so that these are discussed at the budget level with the folks like at my level that are more focused on the budget or project management, as well as at the senior management level to look at overall priorities for the program. And usually when you think about, like, we send that letter out in the spring to or in the winter to solicit stakeholder input, it's sort of associated with this phase of the work, but at this point we generally don't even have funding targets yet. It's just sort of getting the priorities laid out, and then working towards having a consolidated budget that we then present to the secretary. We work through the department on our overall what the priorities are going to look like, and then that budget would then be submitted to O&B. And then in the year of execution, once we get our budget, even before we get our budget, in the middle of the continuing resolution, we're executing the program, and then we finally get the budget. We look at how we're performing in those projects, and that may require us to shift priorities a little bit. If projects are getting done sooner, then there's less money needed for those, or if the projects are taking longer, they might encounter some unexpected delay, then we might need additional funding for those. So there's always, in any of these phases, there's always some prioritization shifting occurring, or prioritization considerations going on. Okay. So just moving on to the next slide, rules of engagement. So for stakeholders, keep an open line of communication with the sites. They're really where you're going to be able to have your input most realized. Continue to provide feedback on priorities and milestones throughout those different cycles, so that if things are changing or there's new projects being considered, something come up in the year it's different, they'll know what your priorities are. And just, if you have concerns, openly communicate them when you can. So the site, of course, they have to work well with you all to keep an open line of communication and work to understand the priorities and the milestones. Also, for me, I think it's to understand why those are the priorities. So make sure we understand what are the main reasons why things are specific priority. What are the risks that people are concerned about? And that way, that can be helped kind of fold it into the discussion. Then the site, when they present us with a priority list, we need to understand how those align with the stakeholder priorities. Or I think we've talked about this in the past, but once the budget comes to headquarters from the field for the formulation phase, that information is embargoed. So the decisions that the federal government makes on how we're prioritizing the budget, that remains embargoed, that documentation. From the time it leaves the site until the budget rolls out to Congress, the deliberations that involve shaping that budget are embargoed and can't be shared with the public. You may remember this chart from prior years. It's one of the best ones to describe what we're doing. In the at least the advantage of doing this online is it might be easier to see. Hopefully you'll get it and you'll get a copy of it in person. Usually if you're sitting in the back of the room, it's pretty much an eye test. But if you look at this schedule, and right now we're in October, and you can see that is the phase where we're working with OMB to formulate the budget. So right now I'm answering, 5 or 6 OMB questions this week specific to the budget, and we'll set up additional briefings to answer their questions to make sure they have the information they need to make a decision about the budget, which they'll provide at passback, which is usually the week right after Thanksgiving. We have about 48 hours to respond to the passback, so it's a very limited, maybe by design, process, but we use that process to correct anything if there's information that OMB has not understood. Hopefully that hasn't happened. But if they have different priorities, again, just sort of appeal that and say, this is what we need. And we may negotiate over that all the way out and sometimes slightly past the budget rollout. That's happened a couple times where we still are working with OMB to finalize the budget. And the budget is actually rolled out, but our volume 5 goes out a few weeks later because we still haven't settled with OMB. We try to do it as quickly as possible, but some things just require additional levels of engagement, and higher up in the organization, it can just take a while to get it resolved. Then as you move a little further on in the year, of course, once we roll out the budget, Congress, the congressional staff want to be briefed on the budget, and there may be briefings, of course, for the appropriations staff, the authorizers, as well as the delegations that are interested. And we spent a lot of time over the spring answering questions. And about that time, we'll also kick off the next budget cycle. So the one at the very top of the page would be in March. That'll be the FY23 budget that we'll start formulating. And that's when we'll, again, start having the workshops with the field and looking at what options are, what work needs to be emphasized, and things like that. And then that'll go all the way through till we submit it to OMB in September. And then at some point in the year, Congress will actually pass the budget. We have at it before October 1st, but generally with the CR, it's sometime in the middle of the year. Right now it's through December 11th, but based on the Senate schedule, they're not even going to issue their version of the budget until after the election. So that puts them into November, and then they have their recesses. So I don't think they would even be able to conference till probably January or February. So I think the CR is going to be much longer this year. And so as we go through the CR, we're locked into the funding level that the last year, prior year enacted. So we have limited ability to shift funding around in those cases. So this is an idea just to have, kind of as a handout for you guys, but I'll go through it quickly. The idea is sort of how is your input used throughout the process? And so when we get, again, when the sites are developing, really from the beginning, developing their baselines, they develop them with considering your priorities overall, sort of what the schedule of these activities would be, and also things like the waste disposition path or the overall cleanup approach for the site, cleanup levels and things like that are generally considered. Then as we go through the winter sort of formulation phase, the prioritization and sort of the rationale for why these things are higher priority and what trade-offs and things that we'd be willing to make if to move things around within the priority list. Then as we look at the budget coming to headquarters, we're considering that information that the field is providing and looking at whether or not, how we compare all of those priorities across the complex. And that goes into our formulation that we're doing for the budget. We use that, again, when we're meeting internally within the department, even with OMB, we can explain what the priorities are, what the rationale is, how the stakeholders feel about it, and we use that, again, to sort of explain our rationale for where things are on the list. As we get our pass back, and depending on the funding level that the administration supports, as I'll go on in future slides to show you, it could be quite a bit different between that and what the enacted level is. So there'll be a lot of activities that we have been doing that would not be supported under the president's budget request. So again, all of those stakeholder priorities are taken into consideration in that process. Then we go to the Hill with our budget to brief them, and the congressional staff is very aware of priorities with the site as well. So they frequently ask us those questions, and as we provide assistance in their formulation process, we answer a lot of questions about priorities and work scopes that can be done. And if they ask for help, we can provide specific answers about work scopes that we may not have typically asked for in the budget. And then, of course, when we enact the budget, once it's enacted by Congress and we start executing it, there'll be work that has to be reprioritized within execution, so to be considered that. So as I mentioned, here's the budget trend chart, a lot jammed onto one page, but it's, I think it's a good news story, but it does tell the sort of the complexity of trying to develop the budget. If we ask for a $7.5 billion budget and we're at, and if the $7.5 billion budget was enacted, exactly at the priorities we requested, it would be a pretty simple process, right? Where we would just come up with a priority list, you guys would provide your input, we would request that money, we get it, and we'd execute it at that. But you can see that, last year in by 20, there was, a almost $1 billion difference between the enacted and the request. And if the 21 budget comes out at a huge mark, which is about $7.5 billion, there'd be a $1.4 billion difference between the request and the enacted, which means there's really two phases to this prioritization process. It's not just getting your priorities into the president's budget request, because $7.5 or $6 billion request, there's going to be a lot of things that don't fit within that budget, because we have to cut something out to get the budget in at $6 billion. But the enacted budget allows us to, when Congress asks for technical assistance, we can influence, potentially what additional work could be done at the level that they're willing to enact the budget at. And of course, they also work, with the folks at the sites to get input as well. So there's another opportunity to sort of influence Congress on that side. This is just the details by site. You can see, and sort of how, if you look at our request versus the enacted, where those big differences are. So between 20 requests and 20 enacted, where the 21 requests and the huge mark, where you see big differences are where we've had to show what our priorities are from a complex-wide standpoint. All right, so I think when we mentioned Savannah River earlier, so that if you look at, for instance, the 21 request is 1.7 billion, which is higher than what we requested in 20 as well as the enacted in 20, it's because we are starting up SWPF, and we're going to be feeding that plant at a 9 times faster rate than what we had in the past. And that means that the tank farm retrievals have to be going at a faster pace. Saltstone disposal units, which I know you guys were briefed on, the Savannah River briefing, have to be built about 1.5 those a year. And we're going to be operating DWPF at a faster rate as well. So the department looked at this and said, look, we've just finished building this $2.3 billion machine. We need to operate it at a pace that takes advantage of it and ultimately saves the taxpayer dollar, because you're going to have this mission done sooner. So that was why you see that as a higher priority. And then some of the other ones where we, for example, at river protection, we supported direct feed law, but we didn't have sufficient headroom within the budget to support everything in the request. Similarly at Richland. But when you look at the enacted level, it usually has restored that back to about the enacted level. That's just some of the insights on how we've used the prioritization process on. The 21 budget, so the Congressional Budget went over in February. We have the House marks, which are on that previous table. As I mentioned, the Senate is still working on their budget, but I think based on what I've heard today, it's going to be a while before we see anything on that. So we'll be operating under continuing resolutions. Generally, that's okay, except for where you have new construction projects. And for construction projects that were going from, say, a design phase to a construction phase, and their funding was substantially increased, or if you had a new start project that hadn't been funded at all in the past, you can't start those. So we do have a few impacts in construction projects, not immediate, but if the CR were to be a full year, or mostly a full year, maybe the June timeframe, we would definitely start having some impacts. We don't expect anything through December. We're going to go back and look at February and see if there's impacts. It may slow down a few projects. But some of those projects have been slowed down just because of the COVID impact as well. So, again, trying to sort out exactly, specifically what those impacts are right now is difficult. At the 22 budget, so we are, again, meeting with OMB now. We generally get that passed back late in November, early December. We scramble to turn around a response, and generally the budget should roll out in February on that first Monday. And I'm going to pause there. So the rest of the things are backgrounds if you have specific questions. Should I continue to share, or should we go back to video for now?
What if we go back to, this is Eric, Steve. Hey, thanks for your presentation, by the way. What if we go back to video so everyone can see your bright, shiny, smiling face? And we're going to go around the room and let folks ask questions. And if we need to pull up a slide for whatever reason, we can always toggle back to it. So what if, for this round, what if we start with Oak Ridge? I'll just giving you a heads up, let you go first. We have about half an hour, so we can have some nice meaty discussion on this topic. And we'll go Oak Ridge with Frank. You'll be next up with the Nevada board, and we'll kind of go that direction around the table. So if you have questions for Steve, let's start now. So Shell, the floor is yours, ma'am.
I don't have a question, but I do want to thank you for the extensive information and the detail. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Shell. All right, we're going to go we're going Nevada into S2 and then over to northern New Mexico. So Frank, question?
No questions at this time from EMSSAB chair. Thank you.
All right, Bob, are you there, sir? Bob had sent me a message. He had dialed in for on his audio line, trying to get a cleaner connection. Bob, are you with us?
Well, I think
Oh, we had you and we lost you, Bob. All right, so we're gonna pass. And hey, if you want to submit your question in writing, we can make sure we ask that too. You can add that in the chat feature. All right. All right, so I see Brad, you got your face on the camera now, so that's good to see you. Glad to have you with us. And we have Terry as well. So Idaho, do you have any questions?
I do. So, December the 11th, what if they don't pass a continuing resolution? Or, we've dealt with that a few times. Is there a standby? What would happen if the CR does not pass?
Yeah, so that does happen. It's called the lapse of appropriations. I don't think that's going to happen, but that is always, it's possible. So we're lucky in that our funding does not expire. So any carryover funding we have, we can continue to operate. And some of our sites have months and months of carryover. In fact, overall, EM has close to $3 billion worth of carryover this year because of the fact that our spending did slow down under COVID. Unfortunately, we don't have the ability to move that within our control points, and we have 55 control points that limit us, unless the secretary determines that there's severe risk, right? So if there was, we aren't going to allow harm to come to the workers or to the environment or to the public. So if we had a lapse, we can still continue to operate. We would just shift funding and then afterwards go back and straighten everything out. But that has not happened, to my knowledge, any time that I've been in the department. We've had some long lapses in appropriation, and we've gotten really close to that, but generally somebody blinks at that point when it starts getting really bad and they pass the budget. So hopefully that won't be the case, but it's hard to tell, with how contentious things are sometimes. So
yeah.
So thanks for asking that question.
It seems like 2020 would be the year something like that we would have issues just because everything else has gone wrong this year. So
the good thing is Idaho is that your site is blessed with the fewest number of congressional control points. So you'll have the least amount of problems of anybody.
We like that. Thank you very much.
Brad, did you have a question you wanted to chime in on?
No, I think Terry's was great.
All right, so the Hanford board, Susan, Shelley?
Hi, I have a question, and I would imagine Shelley does too. My question is of course for Steve, and thanks for your presentation, Steve. It's good to see you. I'm curious as to what has changed that the stakeholders can't see the dollar information associated with the various tasks before the local DOE sends their request to headquarters. Historically, we've been able to see that so that if there is a trade-off, we understand what the trade-off is for whatever priorities we've chosen so that we can really provide informed priority lists and that sort of thing. Just looking at a couple lines on a piece of paper without understanding what the trade-offs will be and the connections makes it very difficult. So I don't understand what changed. It didn't used to be like that. Is there some law enacted that says you can't do that, or is it just a administrative decision that DOE made. I'm just curious.
So, when do you feel like that changed?
It changed about 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago.
Maybe longer.
Yeah, probably longer than that.
A lot longer.
We get a list showing what was below the list, what the tasks were, and what the dollar amounts were associated with those tasks. And I don't understand, because it hasn't been sent to OMB yet, and we do want to give you informed advice. But if we don't have the detail level to provide that informed advice, it's a real struggle, and I don't understand why. And I'm not the only one who doesn't understand why.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. At least for as long as I've been in the position, I thought that we were not allowed to share specific funding levels for at the activity level that are going into the budget, because that would be embargoed. Now, in the past, maybe we've shared baselines or, sort of a different level or different of the data. It's possible that sites actually shared it, and I will have to get back to you on exactly where it says we can't show you that. But my understanding was that that's embargoed, so we're not allowed to share the actual funding levels.
Yeah, we used to get the ABBs. We used to get the priority list. Here's what's above the line. Here's what's below the line. And yeah, I can tell you we did. I've seen them.
Yeah.
So
I think we probably weren't supposed to be doing that in the past, but so let me ask you this, because I think that the thought, at least the current thinking, is that from regardless of what it costs, right? If you're basically weighing in on what the priorities are, right? So if what's more important, the 300, 296 waste site or K-Basin dewatering, right? The dollar amount of it is that, how does that, I guess, affect your decision on how important either one of those would be?
How could it not? It's a cost versus benefit balance with risk. How could it not make a difference? Yeah, I mean, it isn't the ultimate decider, of course, but it just makes sense to me. These are my taxpayer dollars and everybody else's taxpayer dollars. We want to see that they are spent in the most benefit for the buck. Anyway, we can have this esoteric discussion, and I'm sure everybody doesn't want to hear it, but it's a real puzzle, and we are struggling to provide that informed advice based on facts and based on a little more detail. Anyway.
Hey, Susan,
that's my question.
Susan, this is Gil. When you guys do your IPL letter, do you get a lot of information then?
We give as much as we get.
I mean, that's the thing that's confusing. I mean, I think we had this conversation last time we were in person. It's confusing to us from Savannah River because I feel we get that information when we do the IPL letter. Our budget, John Lopez, our budget guy, he comes in and gives us a ton of information and is there and answers all the questions that we have. So I'm kind of confused if this is a Hanford issue.
And it may be. I don't know.
Yeah.
So, Gil, does John give you the specific dollar amounts for each activity?
I'd have to get help from my team, but I don't think so. No, we get. Was it POB level? Is that correct? Am I speaking correctly? Steve,
what did you say? POB?
Is it the POB or James? If you're on, we get the POB level. We don't get down to the actual specific, but we get down to the, this area in our budget talks, and so then we can give our recommendation as we see fit from there.
PBS.
PBS. I apologize. Thank you, James. PBS. I said POB. My bad.
It's a PBS poll, yeah.
So, I mean, you know, I feel Susan's frustration because if I didn't get that information, it'd be extremely frustrating. But from Savannah Riverside, I feel we get plenty of info.
Anyway, thank you very much.
Thanks, Susan. Shelley, do you have a question?
Well, we kick this thing down the road every week. And I know that Gil's been pretty happy with the information that they've gotten. But there actually was a time, Eric, when we really got to look at what the integrated priority lists were and understand the disposition pathways for those projects and the ability to see them to fruition and the rationale behind it and the risk. And we don't get that kind of detail and it's actually been many years now. And so those of us that have been around a long time miss that and are frustrated that, you know, we can't have that information. And I mean, there's no sense in asking for projects and that we, you know, that we can't see come to fruition or don't have disposition pathways. So there was a much more collaborative and open dialogue that happened prior to the submission of the budget. And I'm trying to remember now how long ago it happened. If it happened when we saw our site split and we ended up with RL, with the original operations side and the Office of River Protection side. I honestly, I don't have that memory bank anymore about when that split happened, but we don't ever seem to find a solution for this, and so it's a little frustrating. The one thing, Steve, I wanted to ask you about, because I don't know a darn thing about it, and maybe it doesn't even fit in here, is what does it mean when we see the department enact a force majeure for a site and for projects, and how does that then complicate the budgets and decision processes for getting the work done? Can you answer that, or I have no sense of it?
Could you just, I think for everybody's benefit, but just give a little bit more background on which project you're referring to?
Well, I don't know at this point. I think at Hanford, we haven't really talked about it yet. But I believe that DOE is going to, or has, and I don't know what you call it, asked for or said there will be a force majeure, which I believe is something that's beyond their ability to deal with. And I don't understand that law. I don't understand the application of it. And maybe this is just too premature to even talk about. Maybe we need to do that at our site. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I would just say that, you know, so that would have to do with us meeting, you know, a compliance agreement or commitment that we made that we're legally obligated to make, and we, you know, there's lots of reasons, you know, can be, you know, technical reasons we couldn't build a facility in time, or, you know, we've had those issues happen with lots of sites where it's just you know, building nuclear facilities in, you know, in this decade, the last decade is a lot different than what we were doing, you know, early on in the weapons program. I mean, it's different standards now, but also the industry is not there. So we've seen things cost more, take longer. That could be a reason. We also have, if, you know, during, I don't know if COVID would be a reason, but I mean, you got a national pandemic where, yeah, we've gone to limited work on some especially work that requires people to be near each other. So any construction or things where people are in close quarters, that's obviously impacted our ability to do the work. So yeah, I don't know if those are the ones where specifically that are coming up, but I think that would be potentially possible. So we're getting ready to do an execution briefing on FY20 with the House requested it. So we're doing that next week. So I'll go through, where we are with funding, where we have projects that have gotten delayed, where we think we're going to have funding impacts because we couldn't get the work done. But we were still paying to maintain the workforce, right? So we were spending the money, but we weren't doing the work. So we may have cases where that was the last year of funding for that project, and now the project's going to take many years, or a year longer, at least a year, right? Longer than we may need funding. So they're asking, the Hill is asking us from an execution standpoint. That is one of the benefits of having a CR. If there's a good news story in that, is that you have an opportunity during the year of execution to change the funding level, or if not the level, how it's allocated within that.
It's evaluation.
Yeah, so they can allow us to shift and fix things, and so I know, as things change, we may shift that. That's what I was saying. Like the priorities, it's not just in the formulation; it's all the way through, the year of execution, because we are constantly having to refine things. I was going to say, going back to your initial, part of their question, saying that you didn't feel like you were getting the rationale and sort of the risk at the level of detail that you want, and that's not embargo. I mean, that's
right.
That's not it's just the dollar amount associated with that increment is, I think, what we said is embargo. But I think, it would seem to help you if you have to understand the work scope and what we think the risks are, and what, at that detailed level. So I would think the site should be providing you that.
Well, thanks so much. Every meeting, I really appreciate your presentation, and it will be interesting to see what happens with this CR and where it all ends up.
Hey, thanks, Shelley. We have about, let's go maybe 10 minutes left for Savannah River, Portsmouth, and Paducah. Greg, it looks like Gil may have stepped away. Are there any questions from Savannah River for Steve?
No question this time. Thank you so much.
All right. Portsmouth, any questions?
No, sir, none at this time. We'd like to thank Steve for his presentation and for the funding we received, and we're just looking forward to get ramped back up to full strength like everybody else is, and moving forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Bob. Don, questions for Paducah?
No, I have a question, and thank you, Steve, for your time and effort on this. How does a changing administration, we're in the midst of an election campaign, how does election campaigning, changing possibly of Congress makeup, how does that impact your budget in the near future and on down the road?
That's a great question. So in 2017, with the transition to this administration, we did not issue the budget. So that would have been the 2018 budget that we were getting ready to formulate. That was all kind of delayed, and the administration issued what they called a thin budget, which basically OMB gave us our numbers, and we had much less of a discussion about it. Let's just put it that way. We were given, here's your target, and we had a small appeal window, but it was really, we weren't even supposed to appeal, I think. but I would say if the administration changes, that might happen. If it doesn't change, then I think we'll do it. We'll just continue on with the budget the way we do it this year. It's not, again, that doesn't, when you look at the big difference between our request and the enacted, I don't know if our request is important because it lays out our priorities, but it doesn't, and it lets us start new projects and things like that. But the Hill still gets to decide how they're going to enact it. So, depending on how, particular members, we know certain members that influence the appropriations. They, if they don't get reelected, that could impact the overall support for the program. But it's very hard to predict. We know some aren't coming back because they're not running again. So there's obviously some impact as well. It's ultimately, the more change, the harder it is to predict what's going to happen. But overall, the EM program's been pretty well supported on both sides because, the states want these sites cleaned up. So that's the good news. Most of our budget is in the defense account, so we compete with the defense programs. If the defense budget goes down overall, there's competition in the defense budget. But if there's a lot of new defense activities that are being rolled out by Republican administration, then there's competition for the defense dollars too. So I think we will be. I think EM overall will be okay either way. It's just one of those things that's a little hard to predict exactly how things are going to shift.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, guys, and thank you, Steve, for taking a few minutes of your time and being with us and giving us a little extra of your time earlier on so we could walk through this. I know that the budget's critically important at all the sites, and so we're thankful for you and the information you bring us.
All right. Thank you. I appreciate the time.
All right. Thanks, Steve. All right. So with just a few minutes left before we are scheduled to wrap this up, Kelly, we have a wrap up for the day. Any final questions from board members or anything as we look ahead to tomorrow and what we have on the tab? Any final things we need to work on for you guys? All right. Hey, I want to thank James and Heather for managing this in the background and trying to keep the audio and video up and streaming. And I know we had actually several folks viewing on YouTube throughout the day. I tried to keep an eye on that, and they kept that smooth and seamless. So James, Heather, thank you for your time and effort. Oh, the crowd goes crazy. Look at that, James. They love you. So tomorrow, we'll get back with the recap. We've got and there's Heather. Look at there. And we got our regulatory affairs update, our waste management and regulatory framework. And then we'll do public comment. And then we're going to spend some time talking about charges for the chair, which I think you guys are going to, for the chairs. I think you're going to find this really exciting. It's a new homework for us to work on, some specific tasks we've been asked to look into. And I'm excited about this opportunity, and I think you guys are going to like that. So, Kelly, Jocelyn, anything you guys want to add before we wrap this up for the day?
It's great to see everybody, and I'm sorry we weren't able to have this meeting in person, but thank goodness for technology, so we are able to at least stay connected as best as we could during this time. So thank you all so much for your continued engagement.
I agree with Jocelyn. Thank you, everybody, for signing in. I know that I'm not Dave Borak, and that those are a lot of big shoes that I need to fill. But if anybody does have any questions, or you have any feedback on how the day one of our 2-day meeting went, please reach out to me. You can either call or email me because I want to make sure that you're getting the most you can out of these meetings. And just a quick update on Dave. He's doing really well. He is in Vienna, and he is really enjoying his job. And I think he's also incredibly excited to experience the culture over there. I know that the pictures he's been posting that I've been able to see looks like he's having a great time, but I do know that he misses the work here. So thank you to everybody, and reach out if you have any concerns or recommendations. And if I don't hear from anybody, then I will see you all tomorrow for day 2.
Thanks, guys. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a great day.